Michigan, in Michigan State University, and subsequently she got her PhD in neurobiology from the program Biological Sciences at the University of Illinois in Chicago. Since 2016, she has been a research assistant professor and associated with Dr. Ladou at the College of Medicine at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Like many people I know in medical field who made contribution because of their engineer background, Lipika's research has been focusing on imaging progression of pathology in a novel mouse model of Alzheimer's disease, especially on the interactive effects of the primary risk factors of age, ApoE, genotype, and sex. This is we're going to hear from her. Because of that, she published several papers on this topic. Her work has been recognized locally and nationally. Her team has been twice awarded Best Poster at the College of Medicine Research Forum. She and her colleagues have been awarded several grants, including NIH R1 and R56, to pursue the interactive effects of age, ApoE, and sex for AD pathogenesis. So we're looking forward to hearing what she's going to tell us, their update progress. Again, welcome, Lipika.
Thank you very much, Wendy. That was an excellent introduction. And thank you again for inviting me to this seminar series so that I can present some of the exciting projects we currently have ongoing in our lab. So let me share the screen. Is that visible?
Yeah.
Okay. So my talk is going to be looking at modeling the effect of sex, ApoE for induced pathology in novel transgenic mouse model, and what are their therapeutic implications. So like every other talk, I have an outline. So I'm going to be going over what is Alzheimer's disease. I'm going to be looking at what are the risk factors of Alzheimer's disease, how ApoE isoforms differentially interact with A-beta to modulate specific A-beta species levels. And finally, the bulk of my talk is going to be looking at phenotypic characterization of the novel transgenic mice that we did develop in our lab. And these transgenic mice develop AD-relevant pathology that increases significantly with all the AD risk factors, ApoE4, genotype, female sex, and age, thus mirroring the human AD risk. These EFAD mice in our lab we have used for a number of projects, but the current ongoing studies or the shift in focus is coming from the fact that we are going to start using them for studying sexual differentiation and what is the specific effect of estrogen therapies on AD pathology. I did forget to mention, if you do have any questions, you're welcome to put it in the chat box. My lovely colleague Juan and Anna are going to be monitoring the chat boxes. And if it's a question that you need to be answered right now, please free to interrupt me at any time. So like I said, AD pathology, when we are looking at gross pathology, we know that AD patients do present with cognitive decline. So that's evident in gross pathology where we see brain atrophy, specifically in the frontal cortex, in the temporal lobe, and in the hippocampus. And these are the regions of the brain that are involved in judgment, language, and memory. So all this is talking about is the overall brain atrophy that's happening on a gross level. But what happens at a cellular level? Because everybody knows that Alzheimer's disease is definitively diagnosed by the presence of two important protein aggregates, the amyloid plaques or A-beta plaques that's composed of A-beta 42, and the neurofibrillary tangles that are composed of aggregates of tau. So this is all looking at two of the proteins, A beta and tau. So we are going to shift focus a little bit because the way we approach AD is by actually looking at what pushes the AD risk in humans or what pushes the AD pathology in mice. And in our lab, we are going to call it as universal biological variables of AD because everyone has an age, everyone has an ApoE genotype, and everyone has a sex. So let's see how they sort of modulate AD risk in humans. So age by far is the greatest risk factor for AD, and a number of publications has been published that support this. The second one is ApoE4 genotype, which is the greatest genetic risk factor for AD, because ApoE4, an allele of ApoE, increases AD risk 4 to 15-fold in humans compared to the common allele ApoE3. However, there is also a very rare allele, ApoE2, that decreases the odds of AD risk. The next one is females. So the females do exhibit a greater AD risk compared to males. But what is more interesting to us is how these risk factors interact, and specifically how the sex and ApoE genotype interact, because the female E4 carriers tend to have the highest greater risk for AD. So the graphic on the right side is basically showing you that with one copy of ApoE4 allele, the males do not present with any increase in AD risk whatsoever. But when you give the same E4 copy to a female, the female starts exhibiting increased AD risk. Again, when males and females, when they have two copies of the E4 allele, what tends to happen is the odds ratio increases in both of them, but you can still kind of appreciate the fact that the females still are trending a little bit above the males. So which means that despite the number of copies, the females tend to have an increased risk for AD, which makes us look at makes us look at approaching the interaction of sex and ApoE together. So in our lab for a really long time, we've been looking at two specific proteins, ApoE and A beta. Why do we study them? This is partly because it comes from the genetics of Alzheimer's disease. So rare mutations that increase A beta peptide causes familial AD. So this is the tiny chunk of the pie that you are seeing here. But look at what ApoE4 is occupying. The ApoE4 is the greatest genetic risk factor for AD. So even when you combine the A beta 42 and the other genetic risk factors, it is still less compared to what the risk imparted by ApoE4 is. And the ApoE4, again, like I mentioned before, increases the AD risk compared to the common allele E3, and the E2 is rare, but it's sort of protective because it decreases the AD risk. So we've been talking about apolipoproteins. So what is an apolipoprotein? These apolipoproteins are, the apolipoprotein is an integral part of a lipoprotein that provides structural stability to these lipoproteins. They also act as ligands for lipoprotein receptors and may also act as cofactor for other reactions. When it comes to A beta, we know that A beta in combination with tau is a definitive diagnosis for AD. But when A beta forms these plaques, they typically do not correlate with dementia. And it does not correlate with amyloid imaging either. So we had this idea that, and it's been proved by a bunch of other labs, where we think that the A beta forms toxic soluble oligomeric forms, which we do still believe that is the proximal neurotoxin that could cause more hazardous effects compared to the amyloid plaques. So again, amyloid plaques do not correlate with dementia, but the toxic soluble oligomers do correlate with dementia. And so when we are looking at levels of ApoE and levels of A beta, the first thing we are going to look at is the actual levels of ApoE in the CNS. In human studies, in CSF, and in both brain tissues, when people started looking at ApoE levels, which carry either E4, E3, or E2, the E4 levels are always lower compared to the E2 and the E3, whether it be hippocampus, cortex, or the cerebellum. So why is this? So we tend to think that all the three genes are expressed at the same level. So it's not that one gene is expressed, one allele is expressed at a lower level. They all have the same gene expression, and they all come from the same gene because they are alleles. So what is the clue that something else is happening? I told you that these apolipoproteins offer a structural stability to this lipoprotein particles. So these are proteins, and they need to be lipidated to offer a stable structure to all the lipoproteins. So this is the common allele, that's ApoE3, and this is the ApoE3 isoform of the lipidated protein. This is a much more stable configuration compared to the lipid-poor ApoE4, which provides us with an opportunity for a therapeutic target. So by stabilizing the ApoE4 lipoprotein particles by lipidation, we tend to get the ApoE4 pushing more towards a more stable E3 configuration, thereby trying to decrease the effects that it may have in modulating the A beta species levels. So this is one of the main focus in our lab for a really long time. And an additional evidence is because ApoE4 is associated with increased levels of A beta, both as amyloid plaques and as oligomeric A beta. However, like I told you before, we do believe that the amyloid plaques are benign, but the toxic species, A beta species here, is the oligomeric A beta levels. Again, the ApoE4 increases A beta levels compared to ApoE3 and ApoE2. So this brings us sort of to getting a mechanistic hypothesis. So because the ApoE4 levels are lower, due to lower stability of these ApoE particles, because they have a lower lipidation level, we tend to think that this causes the downstream effects of increased soluble A beta, thereby reducing synaptic viability and cognition. And all these factors that are right up in here on the left side, which is aging, female sex, and AD pathology, modulate each of these at different levels. So we are going to talk about the entire presentation is going to be talking about how these factors change specific readouts so that we could actually have more like look at the dominance of E4 versus age, E4 versus sex, and so on. So this brings us to the ultimate Laddu Lab goal, which is to identify targets, again, that mediate ApoE4 and sex-specific effects on risk and pathology of AD. And this is to inform both therapeutic strategies and biomarker development. So why did we develop a completely new transgenic mouse model? So that's because when you're studying the effect of human ApoE and in mouse that express mouse A beta, it is a problem because the introduction of human ApoE gene delays A beta pathology in F80 transgenic mice. So when we look at the PDAPP mice, their A beta deposition starts at 4 to 8 months. When we knock out the mouse ApoE, what happens is there is a delay in pathology by about 4 months. Introduction of human ApoE further delays this particular pathology by another 4 months. And they are standing right around at 15 months, which means that we have a very less time when we are looking at development of AD pathology to be modeled in a mouse. So they are already old, and you won't have any idea what is the effect, like what effect does age have on these mice, because age by far is the greatest risk factor for AD. And so it should increase AD pathology. So now we come in with the 5X fats. The 5X fats, like everybody had been going after. So these 5X fat animals tend to get their pathology much, much earlier, right around at 2 months, which means that when we introduce the human ApoE in them, the delay in pathology is by 4 months. And again, we could actually see a very clean isoform specific version where E4 have the highest pathology followed by E3 and E2. And this could shift based on which region we are looking at. So these are the images that are published that were first published from our lab that characterize these mice. These are 6-month-old males. And again, in the top panel, you have the 5X fats at 2, 4, and 6 months, followed by the E4, E3, and E2. And all these contain the human ApoE4, ApoE3, or ApoE2. So the first thing we want to look at is where the pathology develops. So in both the 5X fats and in the EFAD mice, the pathology first develops in the subiculum. And again, notice the delay in pathology. So this is also isoform dependent because there is higher pathology in E4s, which are here, compared to the E3s. E2 is a different story that needs another complete lecture for me, lecture session. So we are going to leave that off for now. So E4 greater than E3. And the next thing we want to notice is that there's also extensive cortical deposition at 4 months. And again, that's delayed in the E4s when we compare them to the 5X fats. To corroborate what we saw in immunostaining results before, this is the total A beta extraction in a whole brain of a 6-month-old animal that has mouse ApoE compared, pitted up against the E4s, E3s, and the E2s. Here we see that mouse ApoE, mice that carry mouse ApoE, which are the 5X fat, had the highest A beta deposition as expected, followed by the E4s, and here is their isoform specificity, E4 greater than E3 and E2. And this is more like a summary of what we found in histopathology, although I'm not showing all the figures. So again, the isoform specificity in males hold good because for amyloid plaques, for neuroinflammation, both as astrogliosis and microgliosis, E4 is greater than E3, and along with phosphorylated tau levels, which is another protein that's implicated in AD pathology. And when we are looking at how the pathology progresses in our animals, they always start off in the subiculum, like I mentioned, and then they move over to the cortex and then come back to the thalamic regions. So this has been a typical regional progression that we had observed in our older animals, irrespective of genotype. So how do we analyze all our EFAD mice? So we enroll them, we put them into a study, and then right after they are nearing their endpoints, they are subjected to behavioral test, which is a Morris water maze, which has like a couple of acquisition trials and a probe trial. And right during the SAC, what we do is to split the hemi into cortex, hippocampus, cerebellum, and another hemi goes for IHC. But what I want to point out is we do something a little bit different in terms of biochemistry because we do a sequential protein extraction. So instead of looking at total brains, we want to look at where each of those proteins are. So we tend to homogenize the brains in TBS, look at what proteins are soluble in TBS, which we are calling it as the soluble fraction. And we also have a detergent soluble fraction, which is TBSX. And remember that it's a non-ionic detergent. And so you can expect to see lipidated particles in there. So the next fraction would be the insoluble fraction that's associated with the dense core plaques. We also do typical ELISAs that look at ApoE levels, A beta levels, but one thing that I would like to point out is we also have an in-house ELISA, a capture detect ELISA for oligomeric levels of A beta, which we did develop in our lab. Again, for all the variables, we look at 3 genotypes. It's E2, E3, and E4. We look at 2 sexes. And just to make things a little bit more difficult, we look at ages ranging from 4, 6, 8, 10, 14, and 18. We also have other brain regions. This comes in picture for biochemistry because immunostaining, you can look at any brain region by immunostaining for a specific protein of interest. So this is for biochemistry. We look at hippocampus and cortex, which are susceptible regions, versus the cerebellum, which is which is resistant for AD pathology. These are immunostaining images that were obtained from 6-month-old EFAD mice. And again, consistent with our hypothesis, what we see is higher levels of amyloid deposition, A beta deposition, and neuroinflammation in the cortex and subiculum of these E4s compared to the E3s. Again, like I said, the E2 is a different story, and we are yet trying to figure out what is the effect of E2 genotype on all our readouts. So consistent with what we've observed so far, so we were looking at total A beta 42 levels. So we looked at A beta deposition. Now we are going to look at A beta 42 levels. So again, the E4 show higher levels of total A beta compared to E3 and E2. This is consistent in both soluble fraction and the insoluble fraction. So we have an increase in E4s, total, soluble, and insoluble A beta. For total ApoE levels, remember that hypothesis that the E4s are supposed to be less lipidated. So we are going to revisit that hypothesis. So for the total ApoE levels, we see that the E4s have reduced total ApoE compared to the E2s and the E3s. And this is even more evident in the detergent soluble fraction, which we do extract by a non-ionic detergent, again, making sure that the lipidated particles are there. For the soluble profile, again, for the soluble profile, we take just the soluble fraction. Although we don't see any genotype specific differences, although we don't expect it, we do see a massive increase in oligomeric A beta levels and soluble A beta 42 for the E4s and not for the other two genotypes. So far, we've been looking at just the males, and it has been a consensus in scientific field for a number of years that when you include females in your study, it is going to confound your results because of the presence of estrogen, because their levels cycle, there is an effect of estrogen, which produces good effects, bad effects, so on. So we decided to look at, okay, let's go down, grab a couple of males and females and look at, is there a difference actually? So what is the effect? So these are immunostaining images from 8-month E4 males. So remember that E4s already have an increased A beta deposition and neuroinflammation. But in this case, when you compare a male versus a female, we could see that in the cortex of a female, we see exaggerated or massive amounts of A beta deposition and neuroinflammation compared to the males right here. And consistent with what we saw in immunostaining, we also see their total A beta levels reflected here, where the total A beta levels are higher in females compared to the males. And then again, the soluble oligomeric A beta comes again into the picture, where the E4 females show higher levels of soluble A beta compared to the males. For total ApoE levels, again, the E4 females show less ApoE4 compared to the males. As expected, look at their levels in the TBSX detergent fraction. So E4 females tend to have lower levels of lipidated ApoE compared to the males. So we started kind of modifying the hypothesis because we think that the E3 and E4 differences that happen will hold good for the male versus female when you insert the male versus female here. So again, we saw lower levels of ApoE4 levels in females compared to the males. And then that is partly due to the fact that they have lower stability due to lower lipidation, which results in a massive increase in soluble A beta 42 in the females compared to the males. And that leads to a faster cognitive decline due to lowering of synaptic viability in females compared to the males. So we did account for ApoE genotype, we did account for sex. So the last piece of the puzzle is sort of getting in that age effect. So to solve that puzzle, what we did was to simply age up the animals. So all our primary cohorts, which is the male E3, which is the dark blue one, female E3s, male E4s, female E4s, they were all aged up to 18 months. And this is showing a typical Kaplan-Meier curve, looking at just how many mice die at the end of the study. So at the end of 18 months, my female E4s are the ones that have the least survival, and the E3 males have the highest survival, and the rest of the two are in between. Pay attention to what this linear hierarchy is telling us, because these extremes are always fixed when it comes to looking at AD pathology. So when there is a male E3, there is going to be less pathology associated with them. When there is a female E4 involved, it's going to be involved with higher levels of A beta pathology or AD pathology in general. And this is showing you a full panel of immunostaining images from those animals from the primary cohorts, which are male E3, female E3s, male E4s, and female E4s. So I think you could appreciate that even within every cohort, the effect of age is very, very clear. And if I put the two cohorts together, you can actually appreciate even the difference between genotypes or the difference between the sexes. To make things easier, we do quantify the results. So we look at percentage area occupied by the GFAP staining. And when they are plotted, it looks like a beautiful histogram where you can clearly see the age effect in each of these cohorts and a sex effect, which I believe is primarily driven, of course, by the females, and a genotype effect, which could be attributed to look where the female E4s are standing. So we also have an interaction between age and sex and genotype and sex. So again, the linear relationship sort of holds good, where we are looking at E3 males at the lowest end of the spectrum, E4 females at the highest end of the spectrum, and the two in between. We are yet to decide where those two cohorts stand, because depending on the readout, whether it be neuroinflammation or apoe-lipidation, they could actually be changing their positions. Same thing as before, we are looking at A-beta deposition, and all these brains are stained for MOAB2, an antibody, again, we developed in our lab because it's specific towards A-beta 42 and does not detect APP. These, again, are the primary cohorts. And again, you will be able to appreciate how the pathology develops within each cohort as they age. Again, you can also see how the genotype differences hold good and the sex differences, specifically in the E4 cohort. Quantification shows that there is primary effects of age, genotype, and sex. So the age, all of them increase linearly. And there is also an interactive effect between age and sex, between age and genotype, and an interactive effect of all the factors, which is age, ApoE genotype, and sex. Again, we know that the position of E3 males are at the lowest end of the spectrum. The E4 females are at the highest end of the spectrum, and these two are sitting right in between. Consistent with our immunohistochemistry results, what we see here are biochem results for soluble A-beta species. So what happens to soluble A-beta 42? So in each of these cohorts, you could clearly see that they increase. However, they do end up plateauing at different points depending on the cohorts. What happens to soluble A-beta 42? In each of these primary cohorts, they keep increasing up to 18 months. There is no plateauing effect whatsoever. But despite the differences in how they present, there is a primary effect of age, genotype, and sex in both of them, and an effect of age and sex in both A-beta 42 and in oligomeric levels of A-beta. So the idea is that when A-beta 42 plateaus, soluble A-beta is going to keep increasing with age. So we believe that the oligomeric levels of A-beta might be a better biomarker to track the AD pathology in our mice, or maybe in humans. And then we move on to looking at, is there a frank neuronal loss? We talk about, yes, this is an AD model. So the first thing we want to look at, or we should have looked at, is do they show any frank neuronal loss? So this is showing you the regions that I was counting the neurons in. So this is the subiculum, and this is the somatosensory cortex. I specifically focused on the layer 5 because of previously published research. And this is a thumbnail that's basically showing you two different extremes. This is a really young male E3 mice, and this is the old E4 female. Look how the neurons look at in the subiculum versus the somatosensory cortex. And though the thumbnail looks like this, when we started looking at the actual quantifications, we see a gradual drop in number of neurons for all of the primary cohorts when I counted the neurons at 6, 10, 14, and 18. And there is also an interaction between age and genotype. So far we had a neuronal loss, which is a correlate for cognitive decline in the mice. But unfortunately, in our case, we tried out a bunch of different behavioral tests, but a behavioral test for our mice should be able to distinguish between young versus middle versus old, an E3 versus E4 animal, and a male versus a female. That's a lot of variables, and we are asking a lot of questions here. So we do know that the Morris-Water maze protocols that exist assess hippocampus-dependent spatial learning and memory. Specifically, what we are using are acquisition trials that are looking at spatial learning. And we have 4 trials for 5 days. The mice alternate in position. And finally, we end up getting a readout of latency to platform. In short, do we know that the mice, we are answering the question that, do we know that the mice learned the location of the platform once they were by the end of the day or something? For the probe trials, we are looking at memory. So the platform is clear platform. There is 1 trial per day. So it's more like it's getting a test at the end of the day to learn, to look at whether did it learn the position of the platform. Again, the readouts are latency to platform. That is, whether did they learn it efficiently, and then platform crossing. So did they know the location of the platform? So one more thing that I forgot to mention here is in acquisition trials, we also look at trajectory analysis that I'm going to be talking about later. So these are sample readouts from our 10-month-old E3 and EFAD mice. Again, the standard cohorts, male, female, E3 and E4, and these are the 18-month E3 and E4s. So right at one look, you can clearly appreciate how in 10 months, all the cohorts are sort of learning the location. So you ideally want them to start off at 40 seconds or something like that, then they learn the platform. So the time taken for them to locate the platform should go down if they are learning it correctly. At 18 months, you could see that the female E4s and the female E3s do not learn the platform as efficiently as the males. For both of these, for the 10-monthers, we have an effect of genotype and sex. For 18-monthers, we have an effect of sex and an interaction between genotype and sex. We are moving on to the memory portion of it. So we finished the learning portion, and now we are looking at, did they store that memory of the platform location? So in this case, all our primary cohorts, they were compared 10 months to 18 months. And here we could see that the latency to platform increases, which is a bad thing. Sort of good for us, but it's bad for the mice because you could actually say that the aging sort of makes them forget the location of the platform. Again, the same case in here, you want them to remember the platform when they are younger. You don't want to remember the platform when they are older. So this is exactly what we get when they are 10-monthers, they start off higher and then they drop down at 18-monthers. Again, we do have ANOVA analysis that suggests that there is an age and a sex effect. And for the platform crosses, we have age, ApoE, genotype, and sex effect. So this is something that we've been working for the past couple of months, maybe even for a year. So here we wanted to move beyond the basic readouts that the Morris-Water maze gives us. So we are looking at what is the route taken by those mice? Are they efficient? So the trajectory that the mouse takes is going to be getting analyzed by a decision-making algorithm that classifies the platform strategies based on a set criteria. So this set criteria is because the trajectories will be assigned to 3 basic strategies. So the spatial one is the more efficient one. The non-spatial one is not so good. And the repetitive looping is again not so good. So you want the animals to know where the platform is. So you want them to stay in the direct. But then again, when we are looking within the strategy, when you go from left to right, there's a decreasing efficiency. So what this allows us to do is to look at responses to learning as changes across strategies. So do they go from repetitive looping to spatial once they understand the location of the platform? And then changes within strategies. So let's say they are in non-spatial. Do they move from left to right or right to left? Because this shows they are getting at least a little bit more efficient in learning the location of the platform. And this is an example for our 10-month-old animals. And please note that this is the first day trial one during the first acquisition. So the mice has no idea it's going to be let into the pool. It has no idea what is a platform. All it knows is that it has to cling on to something to get away from the water. And this is the last trial for the acquisition trials, which is day 5, trial 4. So what you can appreciate from this is all the animals sort of start looping everywhere. They are random. They have no idea where the platform is. But during the last day of the acquisition trials, they tend to get better and better. And what is really significant to me is that the E4 females just have an incursion, meaning they really don't know where the platform is, while the other 3 cohorts tend to be more efficient in finding the location of the platform. So we went a little bit ahead and started classifying these, looking at, okay, what is the percentage of each of those strategies that's followed by each of our primary cohorts. So at 10-monthers, we see that between day 1 and day 5, there is an increase in spatial strategies. So it's trying to increase the number of spatial strategies, meaning they are getting more efficient. So that's evident in E3 males, it's evident in E3 females, and it's evident in E4 males, but not so much in the E4 females. Moving on to the 18 months, the data sort of gets a little bit muddy, but then again, I believe you would be able to appreciate that this blue thing that you see here, which are the non-spatial strategies, tend to be overrepresented here at the expense of the spatial strategies. Again, spatial strategies, more efficient, non-spatial strategies, less efficient. You don't want the mouse to do that. So the blue area increases in at least the cohorts that I am interested in. And again, we have no idea what the female E4s are doing, and we are yet to investigate. Like, this is very preliminary data for the analysis that we've been doing so far. So we are going to switch mechanisms or switch the gears a little bit. We are going to look at mechanisms. So remember the first slide where we talked about the universal biological variables of AD. So female ApoE4 carriers do carry the greatest risk for AD. Again, this is dependent on how many copies of ApoE4 you have. So we wanted to tease out what is the mechanism underlying those synergistic effects that we observe in females that specifically carry the ApoE4 gene. So one idea to look at it is look at sex as a spectrum. So most likely when we look at sex, we see males, we see females. But what we do not understand is how each of those hormonal effects have an effect on future life. So we use a rodent model for doing this because it's relatively easy. In collaboration with the Pike Lab, we are trying to do this study where during the organizational phase, if it is a male, there is a boost of testosterone when it's a neonate and a little bit after birth. So this boost of testosterone again goes down and then comes up later when it becomes an adolescent. Look at where the female brains are. No testosterone boost whatsoever. And there is an estrogen that puts it at a default to female brain. So again, the default mode is always a female brain unless and until we get that boost of testosterone. So what we are trying to do here is to feminize the males. So we are going to cut off the supply of testosterone right around the neonate area. And then what that does to it is to have a flatter curve. So the brain tends to be less male compared to an actual male. And then we are going to do the flip side where we are going to be giving it a testosterone boost to a female. And then we are going to start seeing that increase. So ideally, what we have done using this particular study is to create a spectrum of sexes, and more specifically 4 sexes, namely the males that tend to stay as males, females that tend to stay as females, feminized males, and masculinized males. So what this is going to be answering is we are going to be putting in the ApoE genotype effect as well into this. So this is basic study design for that, for the experiment that I told you so far. So again, we have 3 genotypes. We have E3 fats, we have E3-4 fats, E4 fats to accommodate for the gene dose-dependent isoform-specific differences. And we also have 4 sexes, which are males to the males, feminized males, females that stay as females, and masculinized females. All of these mice are going to be sagged at 8 months. We are going to be looking for AD pathology in their brain. And of course, we are going to be performing behavioral tests to look at what is the effect of all these sexual differentiation on cognition. So with respect to ApoE4 associated AD risk, we can sort of look at E3, E34, E4 more so not like a spectrum, more like a discrete variable, because you have 3 copies of A3, you have 1 copy of E4 and 2 copies of E4. And combine that along with the spectrum where you have a pure male and a pure female at a default state. And in between, you have a feminized male and a masculinized female. How does the Alzheimer's disease pathology look like in those brains? So this is going to be one of the really interesting studies that we hope to get data soon. And again, this is in collaboration with the Pike Lab, and we are really excited for the outcomes from this study. After this spectrum study, we are going to switch gears a little bit more, where we are going to be looking at estrogen as a therapeutic. So in this case, we actually did not start off using these landmark papers. All we wanted to see was what is the effect of estrogen. So in all the landmark papers published by Elizabeth Gold and Catherine Woolley, what they've established is that estrogen plays a very important role in dendritic spine in density. And dendritic spine intensity is taken as a correlate of learning and memory, synaptic viability, and so on. So proestrus, the estrus phase that's associated with really high levels of estrogen, is usually associated with high dendritic spines, while during estrus, it sort of drops below. And then to take it up a little bit further, what they did was to overoptimize the rats. And what happened was to decrease the number of dendritic spines. When they gave estrogen to these overoptimized rats, the dendritic spines started appearing. So this gives credibility to the argument that estrogen modulates the dendritic spine intensity in intact rats and in overoptimized rats. So this brings us to the crux of another study where we think that estrogen is more like a blunt force instrument. So it targets all the estrogen receptors, both alpha and beta, and it targets them everywhere. Wherever the alpha is present, wherever the beta is present, it is going to be targeting those receptors. So again, it is a full agonist. All tissues are going to be activated by estrogen. And then comes TTC352. It is an estrogen receptor, but it's a partial agonist. So it's a partial agonist because it has a little bit more specificity towards ER alpha, but then again, wherever ER alpha is present, it is going to be bound to it, and it has downstream effects. So the solution is there is a selective estrogen receptor modulator, which actually binds to ER alpha and estrogen receptor beta. But what it does is not to specifically activate it, it just modulates the receptor in such a way that you could potentially get agonistic activity or antagonistic activity, depending on which tissue you're looking at. The first generation of SERMs were the tamoxifen, and the second generation is basically the raloxifene. And this raloxifene has already been FDA approved for hot flashes and other postmenopausal symptoms. So this study was actually designed based on where the women stand and what happens when they were given estrogen therapy. So let's say they are young women and they were overoptimized, they were not supplemented with estrogen. They do go into a cognitive decline. But unfortunately, if they are E4s, they do go into frank dementia. There is also evidence that in case they are supplemented with estrogen therapy, we do not see the cognitive decline in premenopausal women. In perimenopausal women, there is a cognitive decline, and there is evidence that when you give them estrogen therapy, there is a lowering of menopausal symptoms. For postmenopause, Again, there is cognitive decline if the overactimized females are not supplemented with estrogen therapy. If they are supplemented with estrogen therapy, the evidence is sort of controversial because there are some papers that publish that, the cognitive decline decreases and then the cognitive decline increases. There is controversy in that field. So the rodents are a much simpler models to analyze what's happening here, because we have one sex, we have 3 genotypes, and we control for 2 different ages. So these mice were overactimized at either 4 months or at 8 months. And so the early and the normal are basically the justification for when could we initiate the estrogen therapy so that it has its maximal potentially maximal benefits. We also have a sham group where these mice had a sham surgery and then they move on without any vehicle. And then we have the overactimized mice that have just the vehicle. And then we have high estrogen, which is basically supraphysiological levels of estrogen, followed by TTC, that's a partial agonist, and raloxifene. And all these mice at different time points are going to get a behavior, and we are going to be analyzing the brains of these mice as you had seen before. So this is sort of the last piece of data I'm going to be showing you. And the results for the big study that I showed you so far, we still haven't unblinded those. But what we wanted to first check is, remember that tissue specificity. So here, what I'm going to walk you through is, these are early OX treatments. These are normal OX treatments. I want you to pay attention to the overactimized vehicle control group and how they fare with respect to the estrogen, TTC, and the raloxifene. Remember that the raloxifene is a selective estrogen receptor modulator that has tissue specificity. Uterine horns are reproductive tissues. So the raloxifene does not have tissue specificity there, which is a good thing. But look at where the estrogen treated, the supraphysiological estrogen treated mice stand. They are off the charts, and when we run an ANOVA on them, there's a significant effect of treatment and genotype. And I believe that genotype is partly driven by the E3 versus E4 differences that we see here, because I think we can say at this point that the E4 mice tend to appear more sensitive to supraphysiological levels of estrogen. We still need to tease out what's the difference that's happening in here, because again, it's a partial agonist. We don't know how the contributions of alpha versus beta is going to come into play in here. So those are all the studies that we've done so far that we just started. We are still learning a lot about that, but the 2 papers that are the 2 projects that are really close to publications are how we screen the drugs and EFATs, and specifically looking at how the lipidation, targeting lipidation of ApoE4 lipoproteins. So in this case, again, it goes back to the fact that E3s are more lipidated and E4s are less lipidated. So being unstable, the E4 particles tend to have more higher levels of soluble A beta. Again, the hypothesis that would lead to decreased synaptic viability and cognitive decline. So with that, I would like to thank all our funding sources, our collaborators, and specifically my PI, Dr. Mary Jo Laddu, who gave me this opportunity to present in this seminar, and all my colleagues here, Anna, Jason, John, and Heral, who I really cannot live without because it's a really large lab, as you can see from these pictures. And then our resident creative director, who also moonlights as a graduate student, Juan, who helped me put together all these slides, Joe, Helena, who are other grad students, and an army of undergraduate students who we really, really cannot live without. So I would like to thank you for the opportunity again, and I can start taking in questions if I can't see them in the chat box yet.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Bulu, for presenting. This was a great presentation. Again, we'd like to open it up with, if anyone has any questions, you can put it in the chat or you can speak now. No one has any questions?
I'm going to have a question. Just give me a moment.
Sure.
And I have a meeting soon after, but I thought it was a really interesting talk. And I guess that the question is, do you feel that there are, the relationship between the sex and ApoE is really, it's kind of, we know that there's an involvement of sex. And it's really interesting and important. Do you think there's a component, that's beyond estrogen in there? And what do you think those components would be? Because not all sex things are related to estrogen.
So there is an important effect of progesterone too. So we are not looking at that flip side. And there is also an idea about HPG axis. So every hormone has to be counteracted by an hormone that, whether it is antagonistic effect or agonistic effect, it needs to be counteracted by the hormone that it interacts with in a physical state, in a physiological state. So yes, there are effects beyond estrogen, but I believe starting in estrogen might be a very clear way to tease out what's happening in the females first. But we are also looking at the flip side in the sex spectrum study where we are taking off testosterone, because it has also been shown that the testosterone also has positive effects in males. So we do have that sort of included in the sex spectrum study.
What I'm thinking about is if you look at the Y chromosome, there are actually genes that are dimorphic, and they include, like, for example, DDX3, X and Y differ. That's an RNA binding protein, and it's involved in the pathology in AD. So that's not explicitly related to estrogen or testosterone. It's kind of, it's a different thing. I'm not saying it's a major thing, but I just kind of wonder about, things beyond the gonadal hormones.
Agreed.
Thanks.
Yeah, I have a question that Deepika is very nice talk. Thank you. My question is, as people get older, and I think mice are the same, they more of them are sick, especially they have inflammation and all infectious diseases. What do you think EU paradigm, how much inflammation affect the process, and also between females and males?
Really good question. So I think consistently in all of, although our mice are not perfect, we do see that the females have an increased neuroinflammation compared to males, and the E4s have an increased inflammation compared to, the E4s have a higher inflammatory status compared to the E3s. So we also tend to think of more away from classifying microglia, classifying astrocytes. We wanted to look at more ApoE4 as a loss of function. So we still haven't looked at the flip side where E4, I know ApoE4 is associated with neurotrophic effects, but what you are specifically asking is E4 associated with higher inflammation? I think I would say yes, because even with a number of other diseases, I don't want to say diseases or disorders, like recovery from stroke, recovery from anesthesia, the E4s tend to have, picked a wrong side in there. And we really don't know whether it's a loss of function or a gain of function that's playing an effect in here. But as far as we know, at least in terms of lipidation, we know it's a loss of function in the ApoE4s.
Do you think inflammation affect lipidation of ApoE proteins, and also ApoE genotype dependent?
So far, we have been treating each of those as readouts per se. So although we know that this presents with this, like the ApoE4 part of the story of our mechanistic hypothesis is all clustered together. You see lower levels because it's unstable, and because it's less lipidated. But we really do not know, and we need to tease apart how lowering ApoE4 levels do indeed contribute to soluble A beta, because at this point of time, it's more like an association. And I think a number of researchers have shown that it's the I think Holzman group also targeted non-lipidated ApoEs using antibodies. So which means that the non-lipidated ApoEs do behave differently than the lipidated ApoEs. So there is a mechanism underlying that, and we are yet to see the full picture, because we need to be using the right tools for asking the right questions. And I think one step is to make sure that you use the right transgenic mice that actually has human ApoE, and it has the AD mutations, so that you can ask relevant questions and incorporate all the AD risk factors in the questions. Even if it's neuroinflammation focused, you could still incorporate all these known AD risk factors into the mix to answer your questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Devika, great job with the talk. We have a question here from the chat.
Sure.
I believe it's related to ApoE's role as a apolipoprotein in the periphery. But the question is ApoE3 for lipidation levels more related to LDL than HDL, or the other way around?
That's a really great question. So I think the lipidation levels, we are also looking at FPLC analysis by taking in the plasma of these mice. And so what we tend to look at is the human ApoE, again, in our mice. They act more like human ApoE in humans. So the ApoE particles tend to be associated more with the HDL, more so than the LDL. So what we tend to do is to run a plasma lipoprotein fractionation on the plasma that we obtain from all of our EFAD mice. And then we look at where each of the ApoE is segregating. Is it in the LDL fraction? Is it in the VLDL fraction? Is it in the HDL fraction? So we are still trying to analyze how ApoE segregates in each of those LDL, VLDL, or HDL particles. Did that answer your question?
If the person that posed the question wants to unmute and
Oh, yes, we're good. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So if anyone has any further questions, we can put up an email, or if you want to contact back to the invitation I sent out, and I can direct you to whoever you would like to speak to further on your question. Thank you again for everyone for coming, and thank you, Dr. Bulu, for doing this last minute and stepping up. I think this was a great presentation. Again, this will be recorded, and we'll send out the link to everyone if you all still want to review it or look back at it again.